In this tutorial, I'm gonna show you how to write your own scripted parts for Scrap Mechanic. I would highly recommend that you watch the previous two videos, so you know how to navigate the mod tool and add your own parts. So I created a new mod, and I've added this little duck to it. Well, you can have a look at my settings over here. So now we're actually gonna attach a script to this duck. So in this case, we're gonna right click on the anti-gravity duck. It's already hinting at what we're gonna do with this. So we're gonna add a scripted, which is over here, just click on it. And now we need to specify two things, a class name and a file name. I'm just gonna call it anti-gravity. This is gonna be important for the file later. And now we need to create a new script file. So I'm just gonna click on file and then open location, which opens the mods folder in a new window. We just want to go to the root folder, which is just my first scripted parts, that's how I called the mod. Now to organize things neatly, I would just recommend making a new folder and calling it scripts, like this. Then we'll just head right into this folder. We're gonna right click here and we're just gonna create an empty file. So in this case, I'll just make a new text document.txt. If you can't see the file extension, which in this case is .txt, maybe you need to check this box over here for file name extensions. You see it currently has a .txt extension. We're gonna change that to .lua, which is gonna create a Lua file. And I'm gonna call my file anti-gravity, like this. Then there's gonna be this pop-up and we'll just click yes. In theory, I could already write my code here, but... So ideally, we want to use a proper code editor. I would recommend using Visual Studio Code. It's a very powerful editor and it's, used for real development tools. I'm going to leave a link in the description. Once you're done installing it, we can just right-click on this file, open with Visual Studio Code, and you can see as I start typing stuff in here, the editor auto-completes some stuff, which is really helpful. Now, the next step is optional. So I just opened up the official documentation from the Scrap Mechanic developers. There's gonna be a link to this website in the description as well. We're gonna use this a lot more later. But the important thing is, if I go to the homepage, they also provide the documentation in a Lua documentation file. So we'll just click on this link. This is gonna download a new zip file. Just right click on the zip file and extract all. Then you should see sm.lua. Now we want to put this file somewhere where we're gonna keep it. Then we go back to VS Code and we're gonna click this button over here, which is for extensions. And now we're gonna search for Lua. Now this is gonna list a bunch of available Lua extensions for our editor, but we want to install this specific one by Sumneco. Just click on it. You just click this install button, it's automatically gonna install. Then we wanna click this little cogwheel over here and open the extension settings. Now we're just gonna scroll through the settings until you see Lua Workspace Library. And we're gonna click Add Item over here. And you're gonna copy the path to the sm.lua file you just downloaded. And we need to restart VS Code. And now make sure you open your Lua file with VS Code again. But let's actually start by doing something simple. So now let's go back to the mod tool. And we specified a class name over here. Now we obviously want to link the file we just created. So we just click plus, navigate to our mod folder, open the script folder and link anti-gravity.lua. And now we just need to save the file again. And now it's time to write our very first line of code. So you're gonna type in print, you need these parentheses, and then we need two quotation marks. And as you see, VS Code automatically completes the other one for us. And we're just gonna type in hello world. Then we just save the file, which is, the shortcut is just Ctrl S. Now when you go into the properties of Scrap Mechanic on Steam, make sure you actually have -def enabled, which I didn't actually. Now when we launch the game, you're gonna see this console window. So I just created a test world, selected the mod, and gonna place down our anti-gravity duck. And you'll see that actually hello world appears in the console, which means that our code was executed. There's already the first error popping up, and this is why having this console is really important. And another very cool feature of the -def flag is that it's automatically gonna refresh our scripts. So if I now change my script and say hello world 2 and then save the file, it's automatically reloading the script, and as you can see, hello world 2 appears in our console. Now if I start placing down more ducks with this script, we'll just keep getting more and more errors. Because when the game loads our script, it's trying to create a new class. I'm just gonna add a new line above. And our class name was anti-gravity. It's important you have the exact same name you specified in the mod tool. Then we need to write equal class. Then we need two parentheses, and that's all. Now we just hit Ctrl S again, it's gonna save the file. And now if I place down more and more ducks, I'm not gonna see any new errors. So what happens is when we first place down the duck, it then executes all the lines in the code, printing hello world into the console, and it also creates this anti-gravity class. So when I place down another duck, it doesn't need to load in the entire script again, because it creates the script instance of the class. And yeah, if you don't really understand what I'm saying, now to execute code with our class, we need to attach it to some kind of trigger. Now in our case, our script is attached to the duck, which is gonna create a shape class over here. And if we just click this link, now we're interested in the triggers, which are called callbacks. So there's a bunch of triggers like server on create, client on create, and so on. Now the simplest one is just server on create. We can just click on this link. It's gonna lead us to the documentation. And as you can see, this is called when the scripted object is created, which is gonna happen when a new object is built, spawned, or loaded from the save file. And to actually call this in our script, we need to create a new function. In Lua, you create a function like this. You first type function, then we need to give it a name, like my first function. Now VS Code automatically completes these parentheses for us, and it also includes an end at the end of our function. So now the function is gonna be everything that's between the function and the end. So in this case, I'm just gonna put our print code, which just says hello world, inside our function. Now when I save our script, you'll see that hello world is no longer getting printed into the console. That's because the code inside the function is only going to get executed when the function is called. Now to call the function, we just type its name and add the parentheses at the end like this. You can see that it starts printing stuff into our console. However, we want to call a server on create function, so I'm just going to rename like this. I'm just gonna copy it, rename our function like this. Now we need to attach this function to our class, and we do this by writing anti-gravity dot and then the name of our function. Now if we want to call this function, we just write anti-gravity.serverOnCreate. However, the game is automatically calling this function whenever we create an object, so I can just remove this line like this. Now, whenever I place down a new duck, like this, it's gonna say hello world 3. You don't exactly need to understand this, just remember this basic template. So now we can execute basically any code inside this function. Now, since this is an anti-gravity duck, we obviously want to manipulate the gravity. And if we scroll down a bit on the documentation, we'll see the static function namespaces. And there's a namespace that is called sm.physics, which, if we just have a look at this, has a function which is called setGravity, which sounds very much like what we're trying to do. So let's have a closer look at this function. So it says the function is server only. However, what's important are the parameters. So you see this function requires a number that defines the gravitational value. So I'm just gonna make a new function, which I'm gonna call say hello. And now this time we're actually gonna put something in this parentheses. And I'm gonna call it message. Now inside I'm gonna call our beloved print function. And instead of writing something in the parentheses, I'm just gonna pass on the message. So now I can write say hello, which is gonna require a message, and I can give whatever piece of data I want to this function, and it's gonna be represented by this message. This will execute the code down here, and message is gonna be the same as hello parameter, which I put into the parentheses, and you should see hello parameter in the console. And that's basically what's happening behind the scenes. I'm just gonna copy this from over here and put this into our server on create function. And now this setGravity function, as you can see if I hover with my mouse over it, it has a parameter that is called gravity, and it should be of type number. So if I put a text in here, you're gonna see we got an error in our console, which says bad argument, #1, that's the first parameter, to setGravity, number expected got string. So a piece of text is just called string. Now if we want to write a number in code, we don't need to put parentheses around it. We can just write 1. I mean, let's just change it to 0. Then we actually have 0 gravity. You won't see an error on the console, and it looks like nothing has changed. But that's why it's really important to read the documentation. Because it says, sets the gravitational acceleration affecting shapes and bodies. Shapes and bodies basically just means creations, so our player is unaffected by this gravity change. However, if we're just gonna spawn in this definitely not a Rickroll QR code, and we're gonna put this off the lift, you see it keeps floating. And if I'm actually now gonna punch this with a hammer, you see this doesn't have any gravity. So with just like 4 lines of code, we created a duck that changes the gravity to 0. Which is actually like a really cool and simple thing to do. Like just look at that floating table. Now we can also mess with different values, like we can just say like -1 gravity. And yeah, okay, I just put some wood down on a lift and you saw it actually moved upwards, but then it stopped because I think there's friction that stops the gravity. Well, now it keeps floating. You know, this is just Scrap Mechanic being a little janky. Likewise, we could also change the gravity to like 69 and now it should be really extreme. Like, damn, nobody's gonna flip the table again. Yeah, you'll see that oh my god, the suspensions are not strong enough for 69 gravity. Sometimes when you select something in the console, you see that the title of the window actually changes to select debugged console. And now when the console tries to print something again, you see that my game is, frozen. You actually see Scrap Mechanic is not responding. It's because we literally froze the game with the power of our console. And to prevent this, you just need to select the console and press enter, and it should change back to debug console. And you see, the game is just running fine as usual. Well, but all our anti-gravity duck really should do is just set the gravity to 0, so I'm just gonna leave it at this. And it's gonna be our first scripted part. Now, one problem is that we can't turn the gravity back on, because once I remove the duck, it's not actually changing the gravity again. For now, we can just use this janky way, which is to delete all ducks in the world, reload the world, and then our gravity should be back to normal. The shadow kinda makes the duck look like it has a beard. In general, my approach for the series is gonna be, I'm gonna show you a bunch of coding examples, and you can just learn by doing. However, if you're really new to programming, I would really recommend just learning some of the basics of Lua. Alright, so let's duplicate our existing duck, and now we're gonna build a boom duck. Don't forget to change the UUID, and I'm gonna make this one red. Now, this time I'm gonna call the class boomduck, so I'm just gonna duplicate the existing file and rename it to boomduck. Just link it like this, save it, and now we can open our new script. And now we need to rename the class, of course. Now, VS Code actually has some really amazing functions, like rename symbol or change all occurrences. Now, I can just rename this to boomduck. And imagine you had a really long file. So I want the boom duck to be an explosive duck. So if we want explosions, sm.physics has some interesting function for us. It's literally called explode. So let's have a look at this documentation. This is kind of a big function. So alright, let's just start by copying the sm.physics explode function, because now we don't want to change the gravity. Let's open up the parentheses, and as you can see, this takes a lot of parameters. So the first thing we need to specify is a position. Obviously, our explosion should be where our little duck is. Now, if we go back to our server on create callback, you see that this function also has a parameter which is called self. But if we add it back, we can access the self parameter, which contains a lot of information about the object itself. One thing we can actually do is we can just print it to our console. So in this case, I'm just gonna print self, and you'll see we get some weird stuff in the console. But really, this is just listing all of the properties of the self object. So you see it has like a network property we can use to, you know, do networking with our code. There's an interactable storage, but it also has the shape property. And the shape property represents all the data about our duck part in the world, so to speak. So the properties that have been listed in the console are actually the user data properties. So if you take a look at this list, you'll recognize stuff like shape, network, and so on. So we can actually have a closer look at the shape property of the object itself. So one thing we see that our shape has a bunch of values, like add body, build. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here. Now in this case, we're going to need world position. Usually we want world position. Either way, now we can access smphysics.explode. Now our position is gonna be self.shape. You'll see with the dot thing, we can access the properties of an object. Like our boomduck, for example, has this server on create function. And the shape property, again, has another property, which is just called world position. Now we can pass on the second parameter, which is level. And as we can see in the documentation, level is the destruction level affecting nearby objects. So you see a wheel, for example, has a durability of 5. So we're just gonna set it to 10, so it's gonna destroy everything. Then we need a destruction radius. Obviously, everything which is in the destruction radius is gonna get destroyed. So I'm gonna put this at 69. Well, how much is 69, you might ask? So 1 represents a length of 4 blocks in game. So you can see our character is like 6 blocks high, which would be 1.5. Next, the impulse radius is gonna yeet objects inside this radius. I'm gonna put this at 420, and I would not recommend using this high numbers. They can get really laggy. Then we need to define the magnitude, which is the impulse strength of the explosion. Basically how much stuff is getting yeeted if it's in the yeet radius. I'm just gonna put this at like 100, but we could always change the numbers later. Next we have 3 properties here that have an equals nil at the end. And the equal means they have a default value. And this is why it says optional on the documentation. Meaning if I don't specify these parameters, it's gonna result back to this default value. Meaning in our case, we can just ignore the last properties, just hit save, and now, so yeah, let's place down another duck like this, and boom, it's gone. It just destroyed everything. Look how fun this is. It's also gonna eat us around, and now we can also like mess around with some values like the magnitude. If I put this to 10,000, oh yeah, that's a lot more yeet radius. Oh yeah. Okay, I'm already falling through the ground. Now if I spawn in a bigger creation and place down this duck, okay, there was a little bit of lag. I'm not sure if you can tell. And oh, we now have a floating duck? Okay, that's really interesting. I did not mean to build a floating base part, but we kinda did. Well, currently the explosion looks kinda unspectacular, because there's nothing happening. That's because we didn't assign an effect to this thing. Now we can find some existing effects in the game files. I'm just gonna take a look in the data effects folder, database, effect sets, and now the interactive.json file. Like all I really want to know is just how the effect of the explosive canister is called. So we're just gonna copy this and pass it on as another parameter, which is optional. And this should make it so that whenever the explosion is triggered, it's gonna play this effect. So now when I place down the duck, you can see there's an explosion. Now, although it's fun to always cause the explosions, I would like to use some different triggers. So if I take another look at the shape class, we have a few other callbacks. You see there's a bunch of client function, but the explosion function is server side, so you do need a callback that is server in front of it. However, server on Sledgehammer looks great. Now you actually see it's deprecated, so because I might stop supporting it in a future update. So instead we should use server on Melee instead. Now, you see this has a bunch of different parameters. Now I think as long as I just change server on create to server on Melee, it should still work. Right, if I now place down a duck, there won't be an immediate explosion. However, if I now punch it with my hammer, it creates a huge explosion. Now, I would also like the thing to go boom if I hit it with a projectile. So I'm just gonna copy this entire function, make a new one, and you'll see there's also server underscore on projectile function. And as you can see, it's called when the shape is hit by a projectile. So let's just rename this function as well. If I now save it, and I'm gonna hit a duck with a projectile, it's gonna go boom. And you'll see this duck doesn't explode. If I get a new callback to our boom duck class, it won't automatically refresh it. So all we really just need to do is create a new duck like this, and this has the newer version of the script. But that's only a problem if we had a new callback. Either way, if I now hit it with my spud gun, it's gonna explode. You see there's also server underscore on explosion, and this is called when the shape is hit by an explosion. So I'll just clone my method again, and we'll just rename it to server on explosion like this, save the file. And if I now create a chain reaction of ducks like this, all of the ducks are gonna explode. And actually, because the radius is so high, one duck already exploded all of the other ducks. So yeah, maybe let's make our radius a little bit smaller. And like, I didn't plan for the smooth transition, but you see janky code in action. Because now we have the same line of code 3 times. If I now change the value here, it's gonna be different in all of the other lines of code. So ideally, we just wanna create a new function, which I'm just gonna call boomDuck boom, and this will also need our self object, and this is now exactly just gonna handle our explosion. But now I can simply write boomDuck.boom, and we just put our self thing in it. You see our code looks much cleaner, and we only have this line once. So our durability is 3, so if I change the destruction level to just 2, it shouldn't destroy all of the ducks. Oh, yep, there's a chain reaction going on, which you can tell by my lag. Oh, you actually see this very weird arrows popping up. I actually screwed up big time. So let's assume this duck over here is gonna explode, which in turn is gonna trigger this duck and this duck over here. But then this duck is gonna explode as well, which will trigger this duck again. This truck also explodes, which also triggers this duck again, meaning this explodes again. It triggers the other ducks, and it just goes back and forth infinite. Basically, I just crashed the game. So to prevent this, we want to delete the shape after the explosion. Now our shape property over here has a function of its own, which is called destroy shape. So now I can write self.shape.destroy shape, and we need to specify our own shape, which is just self.shape. and an attack level. And I'm actually gonna put this at 0 because it says setting it to 0 default will destroy any shape. But this is actually kind of a cool screenshot with all of these explosion effects. Yeah, I'm just gonna restart Scrap Mechanic. Like when I now place down a duck and I destroy it with my hammer, the duck is gone. And all the other ducks and radius, oh yeah, you really just saw the chain reaction. Isn't that amazing? So it pretty much works like an explosive now. We could also make it so the duck explodes on collision, but we would have to use a bunch of vector physics for it, and I don't really want to get into that right now. Instead, I want to show you the beauty of just messing with the game files. So I now am in the harvestable folder, and harvestables are just another type of objects, unlike shapes. So I'm just gonna open stonechunk.lua, and you see this code is a little bit more complicated, but it's not important that you understand all of this. I just want to encourage you to just open up some game files, have a look at them, and try if you can mess with them. For example, if I'm just gonna copy our explode function, I'm just looking for the part where the stone is getting destroyed, and then I'm just gonna trigger another explosion, which is gonna lead to a chain reaction, I think. Whenever I now cut any of these small stones, they should explode. Oh yeah, isn't that epic? Oh my, this makes mining a lot cooler. The only problem is that all the explosions also destroy the stone things themselves. Like, this is exactly how I made the Sunshake ad. So let's say you're interested in firing water. I now just opened the script for the mounted water gun, and you can just look how the developers did it. Which is not necessarily the best code always. There's been a bunch of times I just basically had to fix some bugs the devs left in there. And if you need any help while modding, I can really recommend joining the Guild of Scrap Mechanic Modders, which is a Discord server. I'll leave a link to this in the description, but they have a whole channel for modding help where people discuss some weird problems. Look, this guy's trying to figure out where in mounted potato gun.lua it fires the spud gun. And you can see Mr. Craig's helping him out. This server helped me a lot of times. Like, I can't stress enough how helpful this resource really is. Yeah, I hope this can give you a little introduction to modding Scrap Mechanic. Please leave a comment if you enjoyed this episode so far. So if you just want to say thank you, that's greatly appreciated, and let me know if you want to see more videos. And if there's any questions you have, please leave them in the comments as well so I can answer them next tutorial.